So as we collectively enter this new year together, it's my professional responsibility to wish you a Shana Tova Umetuka, a good and sweet new year. And over the course of this holiday, we'll dip apples in honey to usher in the joy of entering 5784. And we'll eat around challah to mark another year around the sun. And as the holiday ends, we'll greet each other with another greeting, Gamar Chatima Tova. May you receive a good inscription in the book of life. So now that I've technically greeted you with these words, I can share that over the past couple of weeks, I've really been bothered by this phrase. May you have a good and sweet new year, because it feels like it misses the mark. How often do we really enter new experiences with only feelings of goodness and excitement? You know what wasn't exciting? When I arrived on the first day of middle school, and all of my friends had grown 3 or 4 or 6 inches, and everyone's voice had changed, everyone looked 3 or 4 years older, I showed up still barely 4 feet tall, and somehow both had the braces that I would wear for the next half a decade, but was also missing half of my adult teeth. If I think back to my early 20s, I remember the experience of moving to New Orleans. I was excited for this new chapter in a completely new city. One I was sure where I was gonna love the food and the music and my new position doing service work with an AmeriCorps fellowship. Despite my optimism, on Monday morning, I walked into my first staff meeting and excused myself within minutes as I was having the first panic attack of my life. It turned out a new community, new roommates, and a new job wasn't actually the recipe for a sweet new year. And even tonight, I feel incredible excitement and gratitude to be back in my hometown of Los Angeles and to be joining this team and this community here at Nefesh. And yet I'm still holding feelings of uncertainty on a weekly basis. Am I doing this right? When will I actually begin to respond when people call me Rabbi? How long will it take for my partner and I to build and cultivate a community much like the one that took us years to build in New York? If you, like me, despite all of our declarations of sweetness and goodness, are feeling uneasy or ambivalent as we enter this holiday of intense reflection and change, you're on to something. Just as many of us have come to learn that new careers and new schools, and in this case, new years, can be disorienting, our tradition has long understood that Rosh Hashanah is less a simple moment of celebration, but much more one of discomfort amid transition. So let's turn to another greeting. In addition to Shana Tova, I haven't yet had a chance to say happy birthday to the world. One of the most central piyutim, or liturgical poems, also known as prayers, that we sing over the course of this holiday is Hayom Harat Olam, meaning today is the birthday of the world. A commentary in Machzor Lev Shalem shares that our rabbis debated whether this day was meant to commemorate the first day of creation or the 6th, when humanity was brought into the world, but they were in agreement that the use of the word today was not meant to acknowledge that this holiday was a celebratory anniversary, but rather to assert that today, right now, as we sit here together, is a moment that we are recreated anew. Rabbi Tali Adler explains that within the piyut, this phrase, Hayom Harat Olam, today is the birthday of the world, paired with the shofar's cries, evokes feelings of vulnerability and fear of the unknown. Today, the phrase is often understood a bit differently as a declaration of a new beginning, engendered by birth. But an honest, expansive view of the metaphors of pregnancy and birth demands the inclusion of the darker aspects of those experiences as well. Pregnancy and birth are fraught with mixed emotions, with fear and danger, as well as joy and possibility. And we see this complexity of the joy and pain that come with birth and with new beginnings reflected in our Torah readings over the next few days. After finally being granted the gift of a child of her own, our foremother Sarah casts away her maidservant Hagar, as well as Hagar's son Ishmael, whom she shares with Abraham, off to die in the wilderness. And then in our Haftorah reading, Hannah, who so desperately wants to have a child of her own, is admonished by the high priest for her fervent prayers. On the second day of Rosh Hashanah, we'll traditionally read, as Yitzchak, the son that Sarah and Abraham had waited and prayed so long for, is bound up and nearly sacrificed as an offering of faith. And my teacher, Chancellor Shuli Rubin Schwartz, reflects on these narratives, and she writes that these texts spotlight the pain and suffering that exist within our midst, the heartache that is sometimes apparent but so often invisible. I believe that this focus on birth, the ultimate new beginning and act of creation, is an invitation for each of us to see ourselves in the text. Whether we've experienced the highs and lows of bringing a child into the world, or we've stepped into a new identity, or we've created a new artistic or professional project, our Torah and Haftorah readings over this holiday allow us to find kinship with our ancestors' roadblocks and their learning curves and their moments of growth. We might identify with Sarah's insecurity, that despite being a new mother, she feels an acute imposter syndrome. Or perhaps we're like Hannah, that despite all the ways we feel blessed, we can't help but to continue to fervently pray and hope for what we know is still missing. Or maybe we are like Hagar, cast away from a life or the lives or the home that we knew, the lives that were comfortable. Each of these figures are encountering a newness that is not marked by sweetness, but by deep fear and insecurity. Turning to these narratives is an intentional choice by the scholars of our tradition. Because instead of continuing on in the Torah, where we last left off near the book of Dvarim, before the people enter the land of Israel, and instead of picking up with the story of creation in the book of Breshit, we choose these narratives. And we pause and we have a moment to recognize that these narratives do mark a new year, but it is not simply good and sweet. Perhaps this is the first Rosh Hashanah without a loved one who has passed away, or without a child who is off to college. Maybe your beginning is a new treatment plan, or a new name, a new promotion. And what comes with this excitement is also profound terror. So how do we navigate these Yamim Noraim, these high holidays, and wish one another a Shana Tova Umetuka with any measure of authenticity? So to begin to answer the question, as we read these narratives of painful new beginnings on Rosh Hashanah, we do so because creation of our best selves, of our relationships, of our world, is really hard. So hard, in fact, that the rabbis attempted to bring us some solace in this reality by offering us a teaching about God's own struggles in this process of creation. And we learn in the Midrashic work, Breshit Rabbah, that the divine attempted to fashion this world many times, only to destroy it over and over and over again. Until finally God arrived at this world and said, this one pleases me, this one passes the test, this is the one that will be able to stand. And one of the great Musar teachers, the Alter of Slobodka, he expounds on this midrash, explaining that the early iterations were not merely acts of destruction, but necessary steps in this process of creation. That the very foundation of our world was built upon these attempts and acts of destruction. and that without the courage to try to make mistakes, there in fact would be no world. There would be no you and me. There would be no us. Rabbi Avi Strasberg takes this one step further. She writes that not only does God have the power to create out of destruction, but we are gifted this same ability to find wisdom in the ruins and to create worlds on the backs of those that are destroyed. To be created in the image of the divine means that we are like the source of life. We have the power to create and to recreate and to rebuild where there has been destruction. But we know that this task to create and to recreate and to build and to rebuild, to enter into a new year with new goals and new challenges, year after year after year, can be so daunting. So I'll ask us again, how can we wish each other a Shana Tova and feel like it's more than a platitude? How can we reframe what it means to hope and pray for a good new year? So this word Shana, it comes from the shoresh, or root, Shin Nun He. And all Hebrew words have a shoresh, a root. And usually the meaning of a Hebrew word in its most stripped down form, at its root, at its shoresh, can provide us a little bit more insight as to what a word really means. So this shoresh, Shin Nun He, means to repeat. But what's unusual is that this very same shoresh has another meaning. Shin Nun He also means to change. So my dear friend and teacher, Rabbi Sarah Krinsky, pointed this out to me as we were talking about the complexity of this greeting. What she explained to me is that what it means to enter another year, another rebirth, another act of reshaping our own lives, is to know that we may repeat ourselves. We might make mistakes, and we might need to destroy. But we also have the opportunity to change, to try again, to find healing in this process of repetition. A little over a year ago, I experienced a rupture in one of the closest relationships in my life. I processed this newfound reality with therapists, with rabbis, with spiritual directors. I engaged in several rounds of direct dialogue, and despite all of this work, I kept finding that the hurt was not dissipating. The repetition was maddening, above all because the feelings of sadness I was harboring were not going away. The repetition of waking up each day with hurt, confiding in loved ones, processing my own role in this conflict, for many, many months had felt like a waste. It felt like there was no movement, no evidence of change. And then, one day, something lifted. Some of the sadness, some of the heaviness, and I could feel a change in me. And I finally began to trust that this process of repetition, of making some of the same mistakes, of waking up with the same feelings, of sitting with the questions of, will I be stuck in this moment? Will this pattern ever change? Wasn't for naught. And in fact, it had the power to yield something new, even if it had taken 11 months. I'm now starting to trust that change is found through this patient repetition, and that this process will guide me through this year with not only the motivation to change, but also to have the acceptance that I will inevitably repeat myself. So on this Rosh Hashanah, when we greet one another, perhaps we can also try Shana Tova Ume'at Geret. May this good new year be one that embraces challenges. Or perhaps we can try a Shana Harsanit Uyetziratit, a year in which we have the space to destroy as many times as we need to, so that we can also have the ability to create. But maybe above all, we just focus on the word Shana itself, wishing one another the right to repeat ourselves so that that repetition can lead us towards change, and healing and growth. And may it be that it's this change that evokes in each of us the sweetness of being created anew all over again. Shana Tova Umetuka.
In the Jewish tradition, there are many, many names for God, and one of my favorite names is the unknown, Lo Yada. How many times have you stood by the ocean and felt like a witness? Something in motion, awake in the backseat, stare out the window, a silhouette sky into the unknown. And how many times have you told yourself over a drink, never again? 4 a.m. in the morning, I remember you swaying, I remember you praying. The last time I saw you, I remember you fading. How many questions can ever be answered? The odds are stacked up against any kind of conclusion. Everything growing, living and dying, ancient footprints, no use denying. On the corner of Venice and some other dimension, see someone stagger and cough in the distance, and there but for the grace of whoever is listening, go you and I into the unknown. Hey! La na 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 na, 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 la na 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 na. Whoa, into the unknown. So tell me you want to get up and start over. You've been dreaming all day. Now that you're sober, it's so hard to let go and admit you don't know. Open the door into the unknown. Sit with us.